fellowships from the Texas Writers League. Her poems and essays have appeared in numerous publications, including American Poetry Review, Bennington Review, Boston Review, Coppernickel, Garden and Gun, Oxford American, New England Revies, The Nation, The New York Times, and Tin House. She teaches at Trinity University and lives in San Antonio, Texas. In spring 2020, she was the Distinguished Fulbright Scholar in Creative Writing at Queen's University, Belfast, Northern Ireland.
That's quite a way. I just feel like I always want to recite Emily Dickinson after a fight. Like, I'm nobody. Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They banish us, you know. I mean, I always want to like crawl under the table. But thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. And thank you for coming. I know I think at least one other person's going to roll in. A friend of mine, a poet, just sent me a text that she was going to show up. But I'm so happy you're here. So we have I think an hour and a half scheduled, and I have no intention of talking at you for anywhere near that time. What I thought I would do with our time, if this sounds okay, is read a little bit for 25, 30 minutes tops, and then give a couple ideas of some approaches to ekphrasis, this thing that that I've been working in and thinking about, and then give you all a little bit of time, if you're interested, to write some of that, and we can share some of that, or we can't. We'll kind of let that go free flow from there. Does that sound like, I like letting people know what to expect? It was funny. We were sitting, some of the other residents and I downstairs, and last night, and I was talking about a sculpture that has just been donated to a museum in my town, and I was describing it, and I said, hey, here, you can look it up and get a picture. And one of the other residents said, no, I like listening to you describe it so I can imagine it. And it was so funny because in a lot of ways that conversation is sort of the seed of all that I'm going to talk about today. This notion of this conversation between the visual arts and the literary arts that has persisted for centuries. But the question is, what does it mean to try to recreate another art form in language? Is it possible? Is it impossible? And I'm less interested in that debate than I am in just sort of the practical creative possibilities. So rather than talking about it, what I thought I would do is start by reading you a couple excerpts from an essay that I've been working on. I'm working on this new collection of poems called Here to See You. And a lot of these poems are in response to different art forms. And this essay sort of sets up a little bit about ekphrasis, this fancy word for poems that are in response to other works of art, and also a little bit of how I came to want to do this work over the past kind of 20 months. So I'm going to read a little bit of that, and then I'll probably read 3 or 4 poems, and then give you a couple ideas for writing. So I had this idea that I was going to play you this Van Morrison song when you walked in, but then I totally forgot about it, so maybe I'll play it for you later. But because this is an interdisciplinary residency, and ekphrasis is traditionally between painting and poetry, but it's really come to refer to any time a poem engages with another art form. So this short essay engages with a Van Morrison song, and actually with Van Morrison himself. When I write, I like to listen to the same song over and over again. Although need to listen feels a more accurate phrase, this repeated listening returns me to a place where I can see the next thing I want to say. Although, of course, I don't mean see with my eyes, just like I don't mean returns me to a place exactly, although I wish I did. Let me try this again. When I sat down to write about one of those songs, it returned me to the place where I first heard it, the place it came from, and even the place where I'm listening to it now. These places have nothing in common except inside of me, which is the place the story begins, as well as where it ends. I'm on my way to meet Van Morrison for coffee. I text my husband from the back seat of Frankie's shiny red BMW. Frankie teaches mindfulness at Queen's University in Belfast, Northern Ireland, where I've been living for several months on a 2020 Fulbright Fellowship at the Seamus Heaney Center for Poetry. He wears square black glasses, pedals around the compact center of Belfast on an e-bike, and is great company, if prone to spontaneous Zenish interrogation. "And what do you have to offer the north of Ireland?" he asked. 5 minutes into our first meeting, I just shoved a handful of onion crisps into my mouth. "My attention?" I replied, my mouth still full. He nodded, but not in a way that indicated whether this was or wasn't an acceptable response. "And did you know your own face before you were born?" I don't recall what I said to that one, but eventually I also learned that Frankie was lifelong pals with Van the Man. "Yes, that Van Morrison," I replied to my husband's surprised face emoji. It has been nearly a quarter century since an otherwise unremarkable college boyfriend from Boston ghosted me cold while also gifting me immeasurably by leaving his copy of Astral Weeks behind in my boombox. My apartment that summer perched above an equally unremarkable Midwestern Chinese takeout place. Each morning as I climbed out the window onto its roof to drink a cup of scalding Nescafe, I pressed play. The early air smelled like greasy dumplings and soft tar, and my hopes for what the still unfolding day might hold seemed to hinge on whether or not I'd gotten up early enough to listen long enough to hear Van Morrison sing Cypress Avenue before work. The song's refrain of way up on, worked on me, or so it felt like a spell, one that suggested I was going to change my life. I'd actually described my little Van Morrison listening ritual early in the week to my students in the creative writing class I was teaching for the Heaney Center. We'd just begun a module on ekphrasis, a term that commonly refers to poems written in response to other works of art. By way of example, I'd shown them Rilke's one about looking at a headless Greek statue, which in Stephen Mitchell's famous translation ends, "From all the borders of itself, burst like a star. For here there is no place that does not see you. You must change your life." Haven't y'all ever encountered a work of art that made you feel watched? Something that made you want to change your life? Van Morrison had been born and raised in East Belfast. It couldn't hurt to bring him up, but the students were a polite bunch who smiled carefully and laughed nervously, and it occurs to me now that I was likely asking a more loaded question than I'd intended, as words like encounter and watched can still evoke Belfast's notoriously troubled past. Despite being born post-Good Friday peace accords, my students still breathed sectarian air, especially when it came to their educations. I recall one soft-spoken rugby player explaining that he never even met a Catholic till uni. They were third years, closing in on graduation, and so about the same age I was when I began climbing out onto the roof to drink bad coffee before biking to my work-study job, folding shiny pamphlets for the Office of International Programs. I wasn't sure where I was going, but it was somewhere other than where I was, and this would become something of a pattern. Friends back home in San Antonio remained understandably confused about exactly where Belfast even was, geographically on the island of Ireland, yet in an administrative region of the UK. The images of a blood-red hand I noticed on flags all over town also meant we were inside the province of Ulster, which includes northern counties on both sides of the border. One medieval legend describes a boat race where the first chieftain to physically touch the land would lay claim to it. As they approached, one cut his hand off and threw it ashore. Wash your hands well and often. A new sign had flashed on the bus stop earlier that morning. It was mid-March by then, and as we wrapped up what would turn out to be our very last class together, I glanced over to where students in the accounting course that met next waited in the hallway. The faces of 3 young Asian men were framed by a window cut into the door and so appeared pressed behind thick, shatterproof glass. Queens has loads of international students, and I was accustomed to these 3 lining up every Thursday. I wasn't accustomed to only seeing their eyes, or to anyone wearing disposable surgical masks, pale blue flags of that strange, not-so-distant country we'd all be living in soon enough. Relocating our family, even for just this year, it felt like a new project we would create together. It was going to change our lives, if not permanently, permanently, at least ekphrastically, providing an alternate window in which our faces might be reflected with new clarity against a background of distant trees. The dark Divus Mountains on the horizon, framed by Samson and Goliath, as the Titanic shipyard's immense bright yellow cranes are known. My more personal ambitions also seemed reasonable enough. I was going to walk on the real Cypress Avenue and recognize the smell of a turf fire coming from a row of ceramic chimneys. I was going to let my new path home change my way of looking, a new accent change my way of listening, and new questions change my understanding of myself. Most importantly, I was going to let a new place happen to me. I had time. I'm still an English professor, but I just had to Google what to call the verb tense of those sentences. All the ones that begin with "I was going to." Grammarians like to refer to this as future in the past, a way of talking about a time in which something was still in the future, even though now, at the moment of speaking, it is past. Another way to say this is that we use future in the past when something anticipated does not actually occur, when an expectation is canceled. I've been listening to Cypress Avenue again these days, if a different version this time around. The BBC calls Too Late to Stop Now one of the greatest live albums ever made. During the summer of '73, Van the Man toured with an 11-piece group known as the Caledonia Soul Orchestra. At some point, he took to ending those shows with Cypress Avenue. The live recording is an inspired, improvised, ferocious take that goes on for nearly 10 minutes. You can hear the crowd's excitement from the beginning. The piano twinkles jazzily, if a little restrained, biding its time. All the little girls rhyme something on the way back home from school. Then the leaves fall one by one by one by one. Call the autumn time a fool. What does it mean to call the autumn time a fool? I didn't get to ask Van Morrison that, but I thought it as I played the song on repeat, obsessively even, every evening as I walked my dogs past a stand of cypress trees along the San Antonio River. Texas's bald cypresses are a different variety than the evergreens that grow in Belfast, with rooty elbows and long needles that turn a deep red before falling, seemingly all at once come winter. Herons and cormorants roost on the bare branches, their reflections opening and closing on the river's surface. I likely told my Belfast students that the word ekphrasis comes from the Greek for description and was originally a rhetorical exercise of close attention, one designed to recreate the experience of an object for an audience who was not there to see it. I maybe even told them that painting itself developed as an art intended to depict and ultimately preserve what would soon be lost. I am here to see you, are the words I hear myself say one night as I pause to watch those birds again, my throat tight. And maybe this is a version, if still insufficient, for what I was trying to say to Frankie way back when he first asked what I had to offer. It is also what we say with our bodies when we linger before a work of art or enter a room where a loved one waits in a hospital bed. Except so many cannot see their beloveds. Except I can barely stand to watch my new freshmen back in Texas try to impress one another on Zoom like eager, awkward birds. How fragile they appear. How lost. It has begun to feel like we are living through a time devastatingly full of what some call ekphrastic hope as we attempt to recreate the canceled world. Classes, relationships, concerts, plays, exhibitions, graduations, weddings, and funerals. And also the fact that we somehow believe we still can. I am here to see you. Dearest masked friend and dearest masked stranger, dearest future fear, and dearest dumb regret, I am here to see you. I say it again, and in the saying, I have slowly and painstakingly made a new ritual that is changing, if not my life, at least my days, of which a life is made. But isn't a life also made of the future you imagined? And what are we to do now if that is what we call this in-between place when the future still feels dangerous, if not wholly impossible to accurately imagine? But I was going to. I've also come to believe that future in the past might be the verb tense of the pandemic itself, the unfinished sculpture, the virtual happy hour, the great incomplete sentence of the past 20 months. Yeah, my tongue gets tied every time I try to speak. That's the line from Cypress Avenue, the turn when the live version of the song really starts to feel like the moment we've been thrust into. Van Morrison stutters dramatically, enacting the act of feeling silenced, uttering a series of sounds, not words. Or at least that's what I hear now, and what I see, and what sticks in my head as I struggle to process, and maybe even more to name, what came to feel like profound grief for something that hadn't even happened yet. But I did get to meet him for coffee. I even ate several of the bracingly sweet Northern Irish fridge-baked desserts known as 15s, so called for the number of marshmallows, crushed biscuits, and candied cherries you dump into the food processor. Van the man is in his mid-70s now and has long trimmed those sideburns that fronted the soul orchestra. His leather-brimmed fisherman cap and skeptical eyebrows made me miss my own father, or what he might have looked like had he lived long enough to come visit me in Belfast. We mostly talked about poetry, and when I asked him what of his own writing he was most proud of, he didn't hesitate. What I'm writing now, he said, now that I'm old enough to actually know something. It's hard to be other people's nostalgia. We talked about meeting for breakfast the next week, but wasn't what was going to happen already happening? The cautious Asian students, the weird hygiene warnings at the bus stop, a known case of coronavirus already at Queens, families from my kids' school and on their way home from spring break trips to northern Italy. The virus was here and was going to stay here, and it would change all our lives. And in saying this, I can't help imagining the young, strutting lion Van Morrison was on the stage in 1973, pacing back and forth as the band waits for his sign, all the guitars and the drums and the strings hovering in anticipation as he lowers his arm and ends the song, if not a version of the world, with a great final shout, "It's too late to stop now." On the way back to South Belfast in the back seat of Frankie's car, I glanced at my phone and found an urgent message from the US State Department suspending all Fulbright programs worldwide. We would need to make arrangements to leave as soon as possible. How will any of us accurately describe where we went this year and what we saw? Will we even recognize ourselves? But is this not also the essence of the ekphrastic urge? The attempt to represent an experience for another person, to bridge the gap in time and space with language, knowing it is likely impossible, but still trying, a kind of futuring even. Once I knew Cypress Avenue as a song about possibility because it found me at a time when all the futures I imagined still felt possible. Now when I listen to it, I imagine a working class Belfast kid crossing a fancier tree-lined street than the one he lived on, and the glimpse of the pretty girl he was going to talk to if he hadn't been stuck where he was, who he was, as we all are. But still, he made me feel it. Mostly though, I think about what he actually said, the feeling he had of being trapped by other people's nostalgia, by our longing to return to a place, a home that no longer exists, or perhaps never did. So that's from a little essay called It seems more fun. You really should listen to the song. Maybe I'll play it for you later. But it seemed kind of more fun to sort of tell you a story about how I came to this project. And the art critic John Berger, in his book Waves of Seeing, talks about how an encounter with a work of art completes it. And I like that phrase when I think about this project. And I like this quote. He says, "It's as if the painting, absolutely still, soundless, becomes a corridor connecting that moment to the one in which you are looking at it." And So, for me, this whole project has been less about, kind of traditional ekphrasis of trying to recreate an object, and more about interrogating that encounter as sort of a possible site of transformation. As with this song even, and kind of thinking about where it located me. As a place to actively practice seeing. And not only seeing what's there, but seeing what we put there. And so, there's endless approaches to this, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about those. But I thought I would read you a couple really new things from this new manuscript, Here to See You, that I'm working on. And for me, one of the things that informed my encounter with some of the works of art that I saw over the past year and a half was the death of my closest friend 2 days before I left for Ireland. And she was a painter. And I was talking about her at lunch earlier. She's a painter, a video maker, a genius. I've been actually thinking about writing a book called Katie Pell's Book of Big Ideas. Because she was that friend that, like, whenever you sat down, she would just say, you know what we should do? And it was like, I'd follow her anywhere. So in the spring of 2019, she became ill, and so I spent a lot of that time with her. And then she died 2 days before I left. And so one of the things that sort of began happening, and I think you can relate to this in just a sense, is I saw her everywhere. It was, what I looked at, I was seeing through these experiences. It was informing my encounter. So I thought I'd just read maybe 3 or 4 poems, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some approaches. I'll just start. This is a poem called A Woman Finds Her Husband, Kerch, Crimea, January 1942. And this is based on a photograph that's at the ICP, I think, the International Center for Photography, by Dimitri Baldermats, a photograph taken after World War II. There's a lot of approaches one could take in seeing this photograph. It's a field in Siberia, and there's been a battle, and the people that have died are frozen in the ground, and people are walking around trying to identify them. And there are, one approach might be to write something historical. One approach might be to describe the painting. But I saw this painting at a particular moment, and this is the poem that came from that. I've heard it was Stalin who said, "One death is a tragedy, but 1 million, that's a statistic." And it was in part because of this I stopped before the museum photograph of a woman bent from the waist, arms thrown wide, as if in the next instant she might reach to gather up from where it lay, his body, like a pile of dirty bed sheets or kindling, although it would have been long joined to the winter field by then, the frozen afternoon sinking lower in the frame. Maybe it wasn't Stalin after all, but it was a day I'd already spent the bulk of pacing the overexposed oncology ward hallways, then listening as the nurse clipped each of 48 staples from Katie's stomach with a tool someone once designed specifically for this tender, thorny job. And it was about then that I tried again to tell her statistics aren't people, when of course they are both. When back on the tundra, each dark mound was statistic fallen upon statistic, and back inside that cavernously numb waiting room, we sat for another century, trying not to see. An old man hunched even lower in his chair, cheeks and arms crusted with lesions, other spots pink and smooth where earlier sores had been. Saying something is true does not mean you want it to be true. He did not look up at his wife as she repeated everything, louder and more slowly, as if this could help any of us understand the difference between them. And this is a poem called Woman on Trapeze. And it's funny, I say it's about a painting by German-American painter Karl Zerb, who was an impressionist in the 40s, but, impressionist, sorry, not impressionalist, I don't think that's even a word. I was like, still thinking about the poem. But you know, it's funny because I think one thing I talk to my students a lot about is, you know, a poem's always about at least two things. Any poem, you know, it has its content, it has the thing you're sort of, you know, kind of the little about, but it's always in part about how it's made. It's always in part about, you know, some larger thing. You know, this poem might be about a dog lost in the woods, but it's also about loneliness, or it's also about landscape, or it's also about mystery. You know, I mean, I think ekphrastic poems, where I'm going with this is that one of the delights for me about kind of writing in this tradition is that you've got the materiality and something that can be a lens, it can be a mirror, it can be a starting place, and so it lends itself, I think, to this notion of that of always writing about more than one thing. And in this case, I mentioned my friend Katie was a painter, a fantastic painter, did a lot of figurative work, and I came across this painting called Woman on Trapeze that not only looked like her work, but looked like her. So, Woman on Trapeze. Today, the acid green bikini she wears, staring beyond the frame as if surveying some small town, pasture, or sudden gap in the big, tense stitching can mean Katie isn't dead yet. In a painting, everything happens next. The bored, bright docents in matching blue shirts must ask the woman on the trapeze for directions to the exit. While the exit, which has been sleeping while sitting up for weeks now, must wait for sunrise to move these vacant rooms to shimmer. This is not a trick, a cage, or even a metaphor for anything, except perhaps the auspicious remaining half of my admission ticket, forgotten in a jacket pocket, while she swings on, so far, then so close, our little secret blurring the longer I stare into her unfenced skies, such tired eyes, thinned with turpentine. I think one of the other things that's a delight, and you know, when you're a writer and you go to a residency, I always have like sculpture envy, or like people, you know, we got to paint on silk this morning, and I was both really anxious about it because you know, the stakes seemed kind of high, like but at the same time, for me as someone who works, you know, with words, to sort of have the materiality of an art object to kind of touch and then move back away from, also I think is an exciting dimension of kind of playing with this kind of work. I'll read two more. Seem okay? Are we okay?
Yeah.
Butts okay in the chairs? You know, one of the things that was great about living in Belfast, one of the sucky things was, you know, having to leave early, as you probably got from that. But where I worked was right next to the Ulster Museum, which is a wonderful Northern Irish National Museum of Northern Ireland, and it's free, you know, and so it was freezing. Now, I'm a Texan. I mean, it was just, you know, it was January, it was dark, it was so cold. I've never been that cold in my life. So I would always, actually there was this one place called the Tropical Ravine in the Botanical Gardens that was heated to 80. So occasionally on my walks home, I'd go into the Tropical Ravine just to sort of get my circulation going again. But I would go in and I took to kind of visiting the same painting every day, which I think was kind of an interesting practice. And for me, I think this is what this is all about, is just kind of developing a practice of looking, or a practice of listening that can also be in conversation, at least for me, with my writing. And but one of my favorite painters is Paul Cézanne, and you think about, he painted the same mountain in the south of France, and there's that sort of myth about him painting till his eyes bled. But this notion of seeing the same thing again and again, yet differently. And so one of the things that I sort of tried to do is I began visiting this painting called Dawn, Kalari Harbor, which is a 1911 landscape painting by Paul Henry. And it's just that typical Irish, milky green water and gray sky and rocks and no people. And historically it's kind of interesting because it was right during the potato famine. I mean, there were people, they were starving. I mean, there were things happening in the frame, but in some ways it was such an image of solitude. And so I ended up writing a poem sort of in three sections where I tried to kind of see this same painting three different ways. Dawn, Kalari Harbor. 1. We knew him as a painter of silent places. There we could linger as river stones and not miss our liars or our thieves, our flat tires and seasonal fires clearing the fields of rhyme and reason. We thought we knew him, his point of view fixed as one would a horse race, or a hairdo, even a wall, fixed, not mended, which lives too close to remember, which would require us to leave this moment, already deciding who we will carry with us across all that muted ice, that lonely light which is still just a painting, which is still just a mind, missing whoever it has to miss. Sorry, these have like been taped up. I mean, feels like I'm showing you my underwear drawer or something, like, it's like these like not really, but like, it's like not even the nice underwear, just like these drafts with like, they're taped together and stuff crossed out, but it's, thanks, you've just been lovely listening, so I feel safe here. 2, same painting. I don't speak for the sky inside my head. One door for the animals, one for suspects. I don't speak for the trees, bending low to beg like poorly set bones. How long remains the wrong question. Not for snow, I speak for the stone inside my boot, the one I ride home. Another approach, and I think I remember when I was writing this, I was thinking like, how spare can a poem be? How absent of sort of the connective tissue and of people. So I think that's kind of what I've been thinking about. Last one, 3. Nearly an hour after the Titanic felt the iceberg, the first ship to hear its distress signal tapped back. What is the matter with you? Today, I tried to paint sunlight on the side of a brick house. A woman at the window glancing down, scraping the last bit of avocado from the skin, salting it to feed another. I tried to praise what left us gutted. In some places, land is already sinking. Storms push salt water in, dry spells prevent fresh from flowing back out. So many trees bleached and blackened. These two are known as ghosts. I write one last postcard to my dead friend on the back of early morning, way out west in County Mayo, or maybe County Galway, there where the harbor narrows to a border as it meets the sea. to feed another, to praise what leaves. Over time, winds and currents consigned the bodies to the depths. We are rushing toward you, cannot last much longer. I'll read one more. How about that? And I'll end with one that's actually, I mean, those are very much obviously in response to visual images, but because this is truly an interdisciplinary residency, I'll finish with one that is actually, again, kind of in response to music. And this came from listening to La Traviata, the opera, and it's called How to Sing Water, How to Sing Air. It has a bad word in it. Am I getting in trouble on the... Just checking. Yes, a really bad word. No. I don't even know any more. Radio, Zoom, it's all kind of. How to sing water, how to sing air. Upon hearing that Verdi did not actually write that famous final high note of Violetta's aria, so that each night the soprano still had to decide whether or not there remains enough breath in her lungs to choose between love and freedom, I press pause. I don't want to hear anyone cough up blood, and I don't want to think about Katie again, but here she comes, best ghost friend, striding toward me, wearing red boots as the famously gray Lagan River blooms in F major, shouting, "Love is freedom!" And then, will anyone ever want to fuck me again? I feel so contagious. This would have been a few months after her own husband died, but before her bulldozer of a diagnosis. Back then, I could still tell her to shut up already. The world wasn't really against her, not with all those live oaks reaching as far up as they do down. Catch one leaf and avoid a cold all winter, or so the legend goes. Give it time, I said. But time was never mine to give. All those bright afternoons we talked by the slow green San Antonio River, which at dawn runs a darker shade I can't help but now read as bile, drained from her stomach while Cookie the Chihuahua slept fitfully on her chest. And now I have to pause again, remembering that to compose is to arrange unequal things. The fallen woman's unfinished song, and what else? Starlings? A murmuration lifts from beneath the Albert Bridge like a giant sky tumor metastasizing. But so beautiful, she became at the end, murmuring to all the weeping men who arrived to say goodbye, "You're such a good guy. I mean, you try to be a good guy." Loving her was like loving the red umbrella all four schoolgirls share until a sudden gust turns it inside out. So it knows hollow, then full, then hollow again. And they hold on for as long as they can, shrieking like seabirds until the last note is blown, brilliant and broken across the famously empty road. Thank you for listening. I haven't read any of those aloud, and so actually getting through that was, thank you for listening. That was, yeah. So ekphrasis, this thing, or this, and maybe for me, honestly, what I needed was a way in. You know, I needed a way to write about something that was too much to come at straight on. You know, and I think that may be one thing that I think this practice has lent to me. What I thought would be kind of fun here, let me pull this up. is to kind of give you a couple ideas, and then maybe we could do a little bit of writing together. So let me pull this up here. Questions or thoughts, maybe real quick? Is there anything on your mind that just based on kind of what, I mean, I sort of advertise this as both a reading and kind of a workshop. I don't know how workshopy it's going to be, but is there anything that anybody's wondering?
So these are artworks that you
Yeah.
did the ekphrasis with. Were they from the time when you were with your friend, or were they something that you were seeing acting on afterwards?
After. So, I
Part of
mean,
your kind of therapy.
I guess, yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what I mean. Like, I mean, I think I'm not interested. I mean, there is this really, I mean, it's funny because it's this little obscure poetic genre, right? You know, like where, you know, poems about paintings. But on this other level, yeah, I don't know that it was intentional, but it was sort of like, I wanted to write about this, and I couldn't come at it straight on, and it was everywhere. So having this third thing that kind of created kind of a way to kind of write about something else. And that's true for everything, you know? I mean, as writers in general, I think you can't help writing about your obsessions or what is, you know, about yourself, frankly. I mean, in a lot of ways. And so finding, you know, another way to kind of do that, I think is good. I'm trying to think if any of, yeah, no, these were all sort of, I sort of took notes for these and then I've been kind of working on them while I'm here. And also maybe a little time helps. You know, I don't know how it is with those of you who are writers or who aren't, but I can't write about something when I'm in the middle of it. It takes a little bit of, you know, I'm usually a year or two behind my own life. You know, but I think one of the things that I guess is fun about playing with ekphrasis is that, you know, the term is, it's a rhetorical description. I mean, that's kind of, you know, the word itself, ekphrasis means to speak out of, you know, so it's from the Greek, and so traditionally, like, the idea is that you would make the silent painting speak. But I think at this other level, when you say it's a rhetorical description, part of what this gives you is an opportunity to describe something as you see it. I mean, that's the whole kind of energy. And so, you know, as such, there's sort of no wrong answer. You know, a couple terms, and this is kind of wonky, but I think one thing that comes up is you have a choice about how explicit you want to make it that you're talking about something else. And there's a fancy word for this, representational friction, but kind of this idea of when you're in the poem, are you acknowledging that you're writing about a work of art, or are you just in it, you know? And I think that's an interesting, you know, craft choice as well. Carry on.
I know that when I'm painting,
Yeah.
I will choose the music that is going to help me get to the emotional context that I want within the painting.
Yeah.
And I know that also if I look at a friend's painting, I can tell what kind of music they were using when they were making that.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, I don't ever listen to music with words when I'm writing, but I mean, honestly, this song, you know, really it locates me. I think we were talking the other day about books on tape too, and how, you know, does that count as reading? We were talking about this, and I said, I don't know if it does or not, but I know that as I've walked through these months listening to words, I now experience them attached to the places where I listen to them. But yeah, I mean, I like what you're saying about, I mean, you're saying something different, which is more about like rhythm and balance and sort
Well,
of
it's an
energy.
emotional connection that is actually coming through,
Yeah.
and that is informing the brushstroke.
Yeah.
And the tempo of the music is also that kind of patterning that you're getting when you're using your strokes. And if you're familiar with that, you can tell what the artist was listening to when you see that pattern. I mean, I don't know what Van Gogh was listening to.
Yeah.
He didn't have music; it was all in his head.
Well, and you're getting to this whole other kind of really even beyond my sort of like wheelhouse of like notion of like, there's even a word for it, like intersemiotic transmission. I mean, it's like something that is basically like, you know, but yeah, not really, but the notion of like when any art form is translating another one, and I don't know if you would say that your painting is about that work of art or that music, But in some ways, I think we could say it isn't a translation, or that's a part of what you've done.
Yeah, I
is
picked
translating.
a partner.
Yeah,
Basically,
yeah,
You know, I got kin spirits.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's funny, one other kind of interesting, and when I think about the imaginative possibilities of this, one of the most famous ekphrastic poems, Keats's Ode upon a Grecian Urn, you know, O unravished bride of quietude, or whatever. I mean, that was what we call a notational ekphrasis, which is, it wasn't an actual vase. It was an imagined vase that he wrote about to sort of use as sort of a vehicle for talking about, you know, truth and beauty and these ideas. So there's this other kind of whole category of ekphrasis that is poems about imagined works of art, which is kind of, you know, kind of cool as well. But I think here's what I'd like to do. I wasn't sure where we're going to be in this space. So when I initially said, well, let's have a little workshop part of this, I thought we might be downstairs in the gallery, and we could still, I think, walk around and do that. But what I also did is I just brought, and there's some clipboards. I brought, you know, there's plenty here, a bunch of postcards with sort of different images on them. Or maybe there's a photograph or an image that is in your mind. But what I thought maybe we could do was just take 20 minutes or so and spend just a little bit of time writing something kind of in this conversation. And let me kind of maybe throw out a couple possible ideas. and if you're not into doing this, that's okay too. But you know, one might be, there's a poem, I've been reading this book in the mornings called Adam Zagajewski's book Canvas. And the last poem is just called Canvas. And it has this kind of anaphora, this opening phrase. I stood in silence before a dark picture, before a canvas that might have been coat, shirt, flag, but it turned instead into the world. I stood in silence before the dark canvas, charged with delight and revolt, and I thought of the arts of painting and living, of so many blank, bitter days, of moments of helplessness and my chilly imagination that's the tongue of a bell, alive only when swaying, striking what it loves, loving what it strikes. And it came to me that this canvas could have become a winding sheet too, like a shroud, you know. So, you know, one of the kind of notions of ekphrasis is that something strikes us, you know, an image, a song, something, and we are kind of struck silent and then must find language for it. So I think that refrain is helpful. I stood in silence before. I mean, is there an image that kind of haunts you that you'd like to talk about? You know, just kind of using that phrase to get into something, or just even using one of these. Another, you know, what are you drawn to? You know, I kind of like where he says, I stood in silence. I try to make sure I get this. That might have been, or I stood in silence and thought this. You know, striking what it loves, loving what it strikes. You know, what are you, eros and thantos, you know, what draws you in, what pushes you out. Another kind of strategy I've used is, and I brought some postcards. So a really easy, quick and dirty, like little poem thing might be to write a postcard, a letter to or from an image, right? So speak to it or speak from something in it. So that would be a very, just, you know, kind of easy, kind of fun, just like little poem idea. But yeah, you know, speaking as some aspect of the work, persona, or speaking directly to someone, or, you know, even just like, I wish you could see. And what do you see? Or describing something that anyone could see in an image, and then only something that you see because of what you see in it. You know what I mean? Just kind of opening up there. So that would be another. I mean, if anyone's interested in writing about a song, I kind of was thinking through this. I was given actually, I'm just thinking about this, an exercise when I was in graduate school where someone said, gave us a postcard in class and said, write a poem that incorporates the details of this image with the details of your first sexual experience. With yourself, with someone else, whatever, but I mean, that's another prompt. I'm just gonna put that out there, or not. You know, maybe you wanna write about a song. You know, the last time I heard, or the first time I heard. I mean, it could be that kind of just straightforward. I wrote down one or two more ideas here, just as I was kind of thinking about some starting places. Maybe I've already given you too much, but there's an essay by Elaine Scarry called Beauty and Being Wrong, and it's a really beautiful essay that talks about kind of correction. This idea, like what I thought was this turned out to be this, or kind of this idea you think something is beautiful, then you change your mind, or you don't realize something is beautiful, and then you change your mind. And so there's a poetic art form called like a hymn or an ode and a palinode. So maybe you could write as if attracted to something and then change your mind. Anything that gives it a little bit of hinge. And then finally, I think the last thing that I think that I think can help you in any context with this is just letting your eye be a lens. Thinking about when you look at something, whether it's something downstairs on the wall or one of these postcards or something in your mind or on your phone, maybe there's a family photograph or something you have with you right now that might be interesting to have an encounter with. But where do you begin seeing? Do you start in the center? Do you start on the edges? Do you start with a color? Is there a pattern? Is there light and shadow? Maybe just spend a little bit of time just really looking, not thinking, not interpreting, not leaping ahead, but just looking, trying to notice what you notice, and then put it away and just write a little bit about it and see kind of where it takes you. Let yourself respond to the encounter, maybe more than directly to the image. So, all right, how about we just kind of take 15, 20 minutes and just do a little writing. So here's a postcard, or you can come pick one of my postcards, or there's just paper back there. And if someone really wants to go wander for a minute in the gallery downstairs, I think you can do that.
One thing I didn't sort of talk about, because I really wasn't sort of in this
There's a
work, but one thing that's been really interesting in some of the more contemporary ekphrastic practice I've been reading and thinking about is it's just the ways it's explicitly troubling, I think, some of the historic gender dynamics of art, of this sense of paintings being made for a certain viewer, who gets to gaze and who is gazed upon. Some really interesting, recent work that is sort of, I think, troubling even the distinction between sort of visual representation and verbal representation, poems that are made in ways that might sort of imitate a process, or blurring the borders. There's a poet named Eduardo Corral who I was just reading a poem of his, and he's an Arizona border poet, queer Chicano man, and he says that's the borders, where things blur, that's where all the interesting bodies are, but I just think that I'm really been excited by the sort of transformation, even of this really ancient kind of form, in ways that it's being just its contemporary possibilities. That's all I wanted to say. So yeah, I don't know. Anybody write anything that they kind of like or want to read? Amy, did you get anything down?
I got a lot done. I am so grateful.
She's my plant. No, I'm just kidding.
And I don't think we've ever met in person.
No, we have never
before.
really. I
This
don't
is
think we
awesome.
have.
Maybe we crossed paths at
Yeah,
a conference
yeah.
or something, but this is so delightful. I'm so grateful to be around. I love being around non-writer artists too. That's
Yeah.
always fun for me. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not going to read it. I mean, what I could do would be like, yeah, I've published a couple books of poems and it still sounds like crap. No, I'm kidding. I want to help people feel better, but no.
Is there a line you like? Come on, give me a line. Give me a
I'll
line.
just full disclosure, I actually am writing about gardens. I'm writing
Oh.
gardens as art and this idea
Yeah.
playing around.
Just a couple lines. Just
Right, okay, let me just
language.
come back to me. I'll fix something.
I only have a couple lines.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
And this ain't poetry.
Yeah, I
okay?
didn't-
It's just, all right.
Don't say that.
Don't say that.
So, well, first, I love Golden Knowledge.
Yeah.
And so, looking at the image, I really couldn't separate my decades-long love for his work.
Yeah, yeah.
However, the back of this card is extremely interesting. Like, the actual card itself.
Oh, wow.
So-
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Demanding little paper, forcing me to turn it so that I can reveal all of this text to me. demanding attention-seeking little paper. Boldly changes its tone to make me look closer, closer, closer to make meaning of it. Demanding little sexy tease of a paper. That's all I got.
Give it up.
But of course it's Bauhaus, so they changed the font and they turned words sideways. But it's so sexy. And to read it, you have to.
And I love the agency and the repetition and the kind of like urgency, the space, you know, I mean, I'm not gonna put you on the spot, that's totally poetry. Come on. Anybody else ready? Yeah, all right.
I'll talk a little bit. So this is way out of my comfort zone or wheelhouse. I've never written, painted, or done anything else. I'm a little bit of a photographer. And one thing, two parts that intrigued me about this idea of ekphrastic.
Yeah, yeah.
My photography and what I've been exposed to with art, I often am moved by it and see it, and I can't put words to it. I can't figure out why, what it means to me. And a lot of, especially my photography, I feel like it doesn't mean anything to other people when they see it. Not that I haven't shown it, but and that's okay. It's my own, and I love it. And there's a couple of people that get it. And so there's a few. I do a lot of street scenes. Sometimes it's just like a beat up old car instead of in front of an ugly building. But for me, it captures something I know with this. But this one photo, which I'll try to show you. I don't know if you can see this guy.
Oh, the bee, is it?
Oh, wow.
It's some kind of a horse flying.
Oh, wow.
And that's on the wheel of my car. And to look at him from here, from 2 feet away, he's just a gray fly.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I took a picture. I think I was just trying to explore my phone. And when I saw the detail that he has, like all the little beautiful things about him.
That's fantastic.
It wasn't just a bug anymore. It was,
It's got a real personality, everything,
So just now I said, let me just brainstorm some of the thoughts that came through. And this definitely is not poetry. And I said, in his stance, there's power, there's attitude, there's beauty. He's super cute. He's fuzzy, he looks like an alien. And all of it's hidden in a boring gray fly, but available if you seek it out. To look a little closer, to find something unexpected. He has to have a complex life, full of meaning, to strike such a pose and to possess these wings and goggles and tender, soft fur. Like, this can't be some mindless little bug that just is looking for food to eat. You know? There has to be more to this creature.
It really takes off from me with that line, he has to have a complex life. Like, that's actually that's a great line because, you know, I mean, that's a poem that's a perfect, like, example of, like, the little about and the big about. You know, it's about that little creature, but it's not. I mean, part of what you're saying is, like, it's about the gesture of looking closer, of having it expansive, of zooming in on life, you know, is what it sounds like. I mean, that sounds like what you're kind of writing around, right?
And I think that's what I see in my street stuff too.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder about what life this car has lived, or the person walking down the street.
Well, it's about attention. I mean, you know, that's an ode to a kind of heightened attention. You know, I mean, really, whether you've got it all figured out how you want to say it or not. But I love that sentence. He must have a complex life, so, you know, because it suddenly is dropping us right in a perspective and sort of a state of mind. That's great.
Thank you, because I've had this photo for 5 years, and I've always loved it, but that thought never came out until I started typing. So thank you.
Good.
I wonder if it's a native species. I mean, that would change. I know so many people, I do a lot of volunteer work, and some people, if it's a non-native insect, it's like, kill it.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't look like much, but I zoomed in.
Yeah, I haven't written any cockroach poems in Texas. Anybody else got anything that you feel like?
I had a friend, very much like yours, best friend who died recently. And I wrote, Anna died in the fall, and at Christmas I got a card in the mail from her daughter whose handwriting was just like her own. And for a moment I thought, oh, it's all a cosmic joke. She's really alive. And the pain was as intense as the joy had been.
Carol, thanks for writing that. And also, it's the thing that I like all of it, but it's that it was the handwriting. You know, that it was this. And look, one could argue, and there are plenty of critics who are arguing that, like, you know, ekphrasis can be extended to, you know, kind of any sort of visual information, and and that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But I would absolutely, one, call that, you know, in this category of writing, but also just that particular image. I'm never going to forget it now. That, you know, the idea of receiving a card from a daughter who then. I can't help thinking about your earlier story too about the doctor and the son. I mean, it's just interesting. There's something going on in your world right now. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful.
I get letters from my aunt.
Yeah.
She has the same handwriting as my mum's, but
Yeah.
I still get her now.
Yeah.
10 years later when they arrive.
One of my colleagues in Belfast, this is just interesting to me, has written a book that we were sort of talking about whether it was ekphrastic, but she came from a Protestant family, and her father worked at the prison. And I don't know if you know much about Northern Irish history, but he was murdered when she was 3 years old by a bomb by the IRA. But it wasn't until she was like in her 30s that she got his sort of death certificate, and it ended up being written, and I can't remember the name of the font, I should, but it was in this swirly, like floral kind of fancy font, and it was just so jarring. And she ended up writing this whole book, or this long poem called Typeface, you know, that kind of used the encounter with that and trying to reckon with that, like you're saying, and what it was describing. You know, so you get these letters, and in some ways it is.
It never goes away.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're very intimate.
Yeah. Well, these are wonderful. I don't want to end today without anyone. If anyone else wants to share anything, it's fun for me to hear. I'm done sharing.
Only if nobody else is.
All right.
I did it on the postcard. It's here.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the one I saved. Because it's different, okay? Not centered, not structured, not... I turned in the perfect one for the project. Clear lines, epic lighting, a line to a fault. It'll make a postcard. Make money. Make thousands, pull it from the rack, marvel at its symmetry, think this is striking, and fill in words specific to them like each of the multitude. God bless them. But this one's mine. Imperfect, random shadows, skewed and offset, accidental genius that mirrors me and my own darkened light. I won't disgrace this with words. That's just me.
Oh man, self-portrait as the, and I love how you dropped us right into the voice. You know, I mean, it wasn't like, and that's an interesting and really effective strategy with that. You know, yeah, that was fantastic. And was there a line in there about that dark shadow? Was that a line in there? Did you say that?
Yeah, it's in like shadows and dark and light.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I just love it. Yeah, no, you came back to sort of the description of the image, but I love that it was just like, that's the one. And we were immediately in the voice. Yeah, it feels like a self-portrait poem that's existing at kind of another layer, you know? It's great. Yeah.
I didn't think it was that complex. I just thought I'd just winged it. Thank you. I appreciate the comment.
No, I mean, I thought so. Yeah. I mean, it's helpful. It's kind of nice to. Again, it's sort of what you see, but then when someone else hears it, I'm gonna hear what I hear, and that's kind of how it goes.
I just have my in at the end.
What's that?
Can I just hand it in at the
Can you just hand it at the end? Would you like a grade? It's really hard to get an A in my class. A minus not so hard, but an A is. Thank you all for spending this hour and a half. I mean, I'm happy to look at something too if you don't want to read it. I'm not here to grade. I mean, but this is really fun for me, and I hope it was fun just to think about kind of some of these conversations. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're about, I don't want to. Yeah, we got a few more minutes. I'm not running off if anyone wants to. Take a picture of your postcard.
Oh, I did.
I love those.